He is the Alabama beat writer for the Tuscaloosa News and Tidesports.com and does a great job. Ben Jones is with us. How you doing, Ben?
Good. How about you, Gary?
Doing very, very well. We've got a lot of topics I want to cover. Let's begin with spring football. It's right around the corner, sort of, in that we get a practice tomorrow. We get to hear from Coach Saban, and then the guys break for spring training. And I like this. I like when Saban does this. It's good for us, the media. We get to hear from him. We get to see a little football before they go on spring break. And I think it's good for the team. If I recall, they didn't do it last year. They waited until after spring break. And I'm not saying that had anything to do with them not winning the national championship. But I like when he does it this way. Do you?
Yeah, I think it's good. It'll give us, a quick look and some time to kind of process what we see. That 10 minutes during the open period can be really informative to us, or at least it kind of has to be informative to us, because that's what we get to see. So we'll have some time to kind of break that down and parse what we see, and also gives the players kind of a chance to, I think, kind of get accustomed to things and get caught up to speed, because a lot of these guys haven't been out there on the practice field, obviously, since January, and for high school players, the early enrollees, it's probably been even longer than that.
Now, I know you're planning your coverage, and there's certain things you're going to be watching for storylines. Now, there are things that come up during the course of spring practice that can become storylines, but going in, there's so many different things to look at, from the coaching staff turnover to backup quarterback with Jalen gone, offensive line, filling in for Quinnen Williams, Isaiah Buggs, inside linebacker. It goes on and on. There are a lot of storylines surrounding this team, as there are most teams going into spring. What are a couple that you've got check marked that you're going to be watching closely?
I think the one that I'm going to be keeping the closest eye on will just be kind of how they rebuild the defense. That was a unit that probably didn't perform quite up to the standard that other Alabama defenses had been up to, at least not down the stretch. It did, maybe sometimes earlier in the season than it did. And then it lost a lot coming out of the season. You were going to lose guys like Isaiah Buggs and Christian Miller, some of the seniors, but then to lose guys like Deontay Thompson, Mac Wilson. Quinnen Williams wasn't on the fence about whether or not he was going to go, but he was probably a little bit unexpected. If you're sitting there in August, you don't count on losing a guy like Quinnen Williams. So you got to work Trevon Diggs back in the mix after he comes back from his broken foot. It'll probably a long way for this defense to go, and they have to do it with a new defensive coordinator.
What about Sark Part 2? Obviously he was here a few years ago as an analyst, but then drew all the attention when Kiffin was asked to go ahead and leave prior to the national championship game. He coordinates and calls the plays for the national championship game. Alabama loses that heartbreaker, and he came under some criticism. Then he left for the Falcons, and he's back after 2 years. What are you going to be looking for out of Sark now that it's his offense completely?
Early on, I'm just kind of curious to see how some of these coaches manage practice, what kind of drills that they run. It's been interesting to see some of the changes from Lane Kiffin to Brian Dable to Mike Locksley and Danny, to see kind of how they just go about their business out there in practice. I'll be curious to see what Sarkisian does, because he, perhaps even more so than Lane Kiffin, really has a reputation as being a quarterback guy, as being a guy who's developed quarterbacks. Also, it'll be interesting to see them shifting back to a position where they have an offensive coordinator who's working directly with quarterbacks after Mike Locksley did not do that last year. So that'll be a couple things to keep an eye on there.
You mentioned rebuilding the defense, and certainly, young coaches, up-and-coming coaches are a big part of programs now. But for Alabama, Nick Saban, second year in a row, going to have a young offensive coordinator. But to bring back a guy like Sal Sunseri, a guy who's trusted, who I think is a technician in terms of coaching, he gets players' attention. I think they respect him. What do you think he'll bring to this defensive staff, in addition to the young coaches that are over there, and also Charles Kelly for that matter too, to have a couple veteran guys back on that defense when last year, even though it was a good defense, that staff did seem to lack experience.
Yeah, I think one thing for Sal Sunseri is just bringing some continuity. When you go through and you add up and you say, oh, well, there's X amount of new coaches on the staff this season, I think you kind of have to qualify that by saying, there are these number of coaches who are entirely new to the staff and new to the program, and then there's these guys who are coming back. Steve Sarkisian was not a full-time assistant, but for about a week or, one game. Sal Sunseri was here for a few years. Charles Kelly, not been with the program, but has been a defensive coordinator before at a really high level and is a really experienced coach. I think those guys will be really valuable. And I think it's been interesting to see, kind of a shift to picking up some more experienced guys to build around the coaches that they have coming back.
Back to the offense, and I want to ask you about Tua here in a moment and not having Jalen around, but let's get to Nagi Harris because we haven't had a lot of access to him, but what we have had, and I got some, got a chance to visit with him out in California, he's not shy about his talent. I mean, at least he wasn't with me, about thinking he's the most talented running back on the team, one of the most talented running backs in the country. He made it clear that he wasn't happy being basically the third option at running back. Now is his chance, not only for Alabama, but let's be honest, if he has the kind of year he'd like to have, he's off on, onto the NFL. Can he be another Derrick Henry in the sense that, Henry was kind of quiet most of his career, and then he just exploded. They brought him along. Do you think Nagi, and I'm not saying he'll win the Heisman Trophy and have 2,000 yards, any of that, but how good a year do you think this guy's capable of having if he is the go-to back?
Yeah, I think he might end up carrying a bigger load next year, later on this year in 2019, than what you saw out of any of the three main guys last year, where they really seemed to make an effort at times to make sure that Damian and Nagi and Josh Jacobs were getting almost equal carries. At that point, all three of those guys were productive. And it was kind of hard for any of them. I'm sure everyone wants the ball more, but as long as all three of them were playing, all three of them were productive, and the team's winning, kind of difficult to explain. Nagi this year, I think his expectation when he got to Alabama was that he was going to be a 3-year player, and I think his expectation going into this year is that he's probably in his last year with the program. He would like to be able to take a much bigger load and go out there and be kind of a featured player in the offense. Now, like you said, he's not going to be Derrick Henry. He's probably not going to have 2,000 yards, win the Heisman Trophy. They've got some really talented freshmen coming in. I think the coaching staff has always really liked Brian Robinson. They've also really liked other players as well. But, yeah, this could be a big year for Nagi Harris. I think that's what he's hoping for.
For Tua, and I'm really interested to hear your response to this. He's an incredible talent. We know that. Last year was kind of, I don't want to say awkward. I'll say unique, okay? He displaced a guy who was, as we know, 26-2 as a starter, had been a phenomenal athlete and quarterback for Alabama. Jalen Hurts remained on the roster as the backup. I think Nick Saban made a commitment to Jalen Hurts to help develop him and to play him. And there's Tua's the starter. Jalen's there. Tua had a phenomenal September and October. Maybe did drop off a little bit. Kyler Murray kind of comes out of nowhere to win the Heisman. He got banged up. Didn't play as well in the SEC championship game. And of course, had the pick six and Alabama doesn't win in the national championship, but he's still a relatively young quarterback. Now it's his. I mean, Jalen's gone, Mac Jones and a couple of freshmen behind him. Do you think that makes it a more comfortable situation for him? I know Alabama would probably love to still have Jalen there, if they get in a bind, but do you think it makes it a more comfortable situation for Tua with Jalen gone? It's a tough question, but I'm curious to what you think.
I understand why you'd say that, and I think for most quarterbacks that would probably be the case. But Tua is a guy who seems kind of so quietly confident in his abilities and doesn't really seem to be flustered all that much that I'm not sure he was uncomfortable last year. Maybe there was a time in the Georgia game or when he started to get banged up down the stretch where he wasn't really comfortable. I don't think that he was ever uncomfortable having to compete for the job because he always had the confidence in himself that he could do it. Maybe this year he'll get a few more reps because they aren't getting the second guy ready to play as much as they were getting Jalen ready to play last year. I don't know how that kind of shook out in practice or not. But I think that, Tua, for the most part, is just going to be about getting him back to the point where he can produce like he did for the first 6 or 8 games last year before some of the little injuries started to add up on him.
Ben Jones, Alabama beat writer for TideSports.com and the Tuscaloosa News is with us. It's a challenging beat for you guys, I know, because it's not like you can just bust up there in the football office and have a meeting with Nick Saban. You got to dig, you got to grind. But I want to ask you about Saban because, I've read, and I think I've seen it for myself based on my history here. He has not been available nearly as often. In fact, he's hardly been available at all for the media this offseason.
Mm-hmm.
And, the turning over the coaching staff, hearing little tidbits from people that I talk to that, if you can believe this or not, he's even more focused than he normally is. He's got an edge to him. Do you buy all that loss to Clemson for a guy who's never not motivated, and I was always coaching to a standard? Do you think he can even be more intense now than he's been since he's been at Alabama?
Yeah, I think it's possible. I'd be curious to hear what you think about this. We asked Nick Saban, I think it was the day before the national championship, just if he'd thought at all about what it would mean to win his career 7th national championship and his 6th at Alabama to pass Coach Bryant. And, he gave us the answer that we would expect to get, that, he doesn't look at it that way. But I do always wonder that if in the back of his mind, if he knows kind of how close he is to achieving something that no one else has ever achieved, and the stat plays a part. Do you think that might be part of what is going through his mind at times? Not necessarily as he's calling individual plays or every day out there at practice, but as he kind of gets ready for the next season. I
do, Ben. I've always thought that. And I listen, and I don't think he obsesses over it. I certainly think that he coaches the same way every year, and it's a new team, and he coaches to a standard, and he's not, obsessed with it, but I think he's aware of it. Sure. I mean, I think the personal aspect, the word selfish derives from self. We all have an innate desire to take care of ourselves. And I think, so it's not necessarily a bad word. I think he wants to reach those goals. There's no doubt. I think when he's done, Ben, he'll want to look back and not only feel good about his career, but I think he would enjoy people saying he's the best ever. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Do you?
No, I don't think so. I think that's something that if it wasn't at the front of his mind when he came to Alabama in 2007, it's probably something that has been there the last few years as he's gotten so close to that goal. It might be, closer to the front of his mind now as he gets a little bit older, but also as he gets so close to winning that 7th national championship.
I don't think there's any doubt. I think it motivates him. I do. Hey, I want to talk to you about the coaching clinic because, I've watched Saban since he got here. I was here when he came, and all the amazing things he's done in recruiting and just how he's just not only revamped the Alabama program, but he served as a model for programs around the country. And there were always coaching clinics, but because of his ties to the NFL and because of his respect level, he was able to amp it up. And once again this year, now this would be great for a lot of reasons. You get Freddie Kitchens here, head coach of the Cleveland Browns, former Alabama quarterback, Matt Patricia of the Lions, Mark D'Antonio, Jeff Brom, 2 Big Ten coaches. The special teams coach for the Patriots, Dr. Kevin Elko, who's long been a confidant of Saban and a motivational speaker. I think these things, not only they bring a lot of high school coaches to your campus, I think these high-profile coaching clinics just reiterate to people that Alabama is the program. There's buzz. You want to come play here. And certainly the more high school coaches you get on your campus, the better. But I think he's taken these coaching clinics and taken them up a notch since he got to Alabama. Now I look around the country and everybody's trying to get an NFL head coach, or everybody's trying to get high-profile coaches to come in and speak because it's another recruiting tool, I think. Yeah,
it's funny. Wasn't there a relatively recent NCAA rule that was passed saying that you couldn't bring high school coaches on your campus to speak at these clinics? Obviously, they're there to learn, but they couldn't be speakers. Am I right about that?
I think you are, yeah.
Yeah, and so Alabama had obviously always brought in kind of a variety of coaches, some from college, some from the NFL, some coordinators, some high school coaches who were really prominent or really well respected. When that high school avenue got shut down, looking at the lineup this year, it seems like they just said, okay, well, we'll just go get more NFL coaches. We'll have an NFL head coach come in and talk, and an NFL offensive coordinator come in and talk. If we can't get high school guys, we'll just get NFL guys. I don't know how many places in the country could kind of pull a move like that, but Alabama can.
Basketball question, just a simple one. This Alabama team, will it make the NCAA tournament or not, in your opinion?
Oh, gosh. The hard part of that is that, regardless of whether or not they're able to beat Arkansas, regardless of whether or not they win another SEC tournament game, there's moving pieces around them in the conference tournaments around the country, and the bubble can shift either in their favor or against it, just based on what other teams do, which isn't really the place that you want to be. You want to control your own destiny this time of year, and that's kind of gotten away from them at this point. Obviously anything can happen in the SEC tournament, and you can obviously regain control of your postseason destiny if you're able to make things break your way. But that's not where Alabama is right now, probably. If you're really pressing on it, I'd say yes, but I don't know if it's any better than 51-49. I wouldn't feel great about saying it either way.
Me too. All right, what about Bama baseball? I know it's still early. Haven't obviously played an SEC game yet, but they are 12-2. Last couple of days, they almost let it get away from them in the ninth, and yesterday even had to go 14 innings against South Dakota State. But what have you seen from this club in regards to how improved are they, and how will that translate once they get into conference play against this brutal SEC schedule that they're going to face?
Yeah, the good news is that I think this is a much deeper team than it was last year, and you see that in both phases of the game. Offensively, there were always going to be 2 or 3 guys in the lineup last year that you felt like were probably going to be out when they came up to the plate. It's a tough game, and that's just kind of the way it was at times. On the pitching side, there are some guys that were throwing the 7th and 8th inning out of the bullpen in the SEC last year that are now throwing in midweek games, which is a testament to the talent that they brought in, the freshman and junior college pitchers, graduate transfer. Jeremy Randolph is off to a really strong start as well. And the defense has been much more consistent. Now, like you said, the SEC is brutal, and they were just so bad last year going 8-22 that even a big step forward, winning 4 or 5 more games, would still have them be in the bottom third of the conference. But winning 4 or 5 more games, getting back to Hoover would be a big step for them this year.
All right, folks, you can follow Ben on Twitter at BW_Jones, obviously daily in the Tuscaloosa News, which, still publishes daily. Good for the T-News. We've seen papers quit doing that, but not Tuscaloosa News. And also at tidesports.com. Thanks a lot, Ben.
Yep, thanks for having me.